Chapter 1, Section 3, Scientific Thinking and Processes. Key concept. Science is a way of thinking, questioning, and gathering evidence. Main ideas. Like all science, biology is a process of inquiry. Biologists use experiments to test hypotheses. A theory explains a wide range of observations, and scientists communicate information in many different ways. First, main idea. Like all science, biology is a process of inquiry. Science is a human process of trying to understand the world around us. There is no one method used by all scientists, but all scientific inquiry is based on the same principles. Scientific thinking is based on curiosity, skepticism, and logical thinking. Curiosity is what drives scientists to ask questions about the world around them. Skepticism is the use of critical thinking to question results and conclusions. Logical thinking is the use of reasoning through information to make conclusions that are supported by evidence. One of the most important points of science is that scientific evidence may support or even overturn long-standing ideas. Scientists depend on empirical evidence as the basis for scientific knowledge. Empirical evidence is evidence that is observed directly through research and investigation. Such evidence is used to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena. The written descriptions and drawings of the gorilla, and the drawing shown on the screen here, are examples of observations and empirical evidence from a field investigation of gorillas. To improve our understanding of the world, scientists share their findings with each other. The open and honest exchange of data is extremely important in science. All scientific inquiry begins with careful and systematic observations. Of course, observation includes using our senses to study the world, but it may also involve other tools. For example, scientists use computers to collect measurements or to examine past research results. Empirical evidence is gathered through observation. Observations are often recorded as data that can be analyzed. Scientists collect two general types of data: qualitative data and quantitative data. Qualitative data are descriptions of a phenomena that can include sights, sounds, and smells. This type of data is often useful to report what happens, but not how it happens. In contrast, quantitative data are characteristics that can be measured or counted, such as mass, volume, and temperature. Anything that is expressed as a number is quantitative data that can be used to explore how something happens. Scientists use observations, data, and scientific literature to form a hypothesis. A hypothesis, which has the plural hypotheses, is a proposed answer to a scientific question. A hypothesis must be specific and testable. You probably form and test many hypotheses every day, even though you may not be aware of it. Suppose you oversleep, for example. You needed to get up at 7 a.m., but when you wake up, you observe that it is 8 a.m. What happened? Did the alarm not go off? Was it set for the wrong time? Did it go off, but you slept through it? You just made three hypotheses to explain why you overslept. The alarm did not go off, the alarm was set for the wrong time, or the alarm went off, but you did not hear it. A hypothesis leads to testable predictions of what would happen if the hypothesis is valid. How could you use scientific thinking to test a hypothesis about oversleeping? If you slept late because the alarm was set for the wrong time, you could check the alarm to find out what time it was set for. Suppose you check and the alarm was actually set for 7 p.m. In this case, your hypothesis would be supported by your data. For scientists, just one test of a hypothesis is usually not enough. Most of the time, it is only by repeating tests that scientists can be more certain that the results are not mistaken or due to chance. Why? Biological systems are highly variable. By repeating tests, scientists take this variability into account and try to decrease its effects on the experimental results. After scientists collect data, they use statistics to mathematically analyze whether a hypothesis is supported. Analyzed data are the results of the experiment. There are two possible outcomes or results. Non-significant, which means the data show no effect, or an effect so small that the results could have happened by chance. Or statistically significant. The data show an effect that is likely not due to chance. When data do not support a hypothesis, the hypothesis is rejected. But these data are still useful because they often lead to new hypotheses. Experimental methods and results are evaluated by other scientists in a process called peer review. Only after this review process is complete are research results accepted. Whether the results support an existing theory or disagree with earlier research, they are often used as a starting point for newer questions. In the figure on the screen here, you see the cycle of observing, forming hypotheses, testing hypotheses, analyzing data, and evaluating results that keeps scientific inquiry going. Second main idea: biologists use experiments to test hypotheses. Observational studies help biologists describe and explain something in the world. But in observational studies, scientists try not to interfere with what happens. They try to simply observe a phenomenon. One example involves the endangered white stork. The number of white storks had decreased sharply by 1950, even becoming extinct in some countries. To help protect the storks, biologists study the migration patterns of the birds. Observational studies can tell a biologist about changes in migration path and distance. They told scientists where the storks were breeding and how many eggs they would lay. Because of these efforts, stork populations have rebounded by 20% worldwide. Observational studies can provide much information and answer many questions. But there is one question that observations cannot answer. What causes any changes that might be observed? The only way to answer that question is through an experiment. Scientific experiments allow scientists to test hypotheses and find out how something happens. In experiments, scientists study factors called independent variables and dependent variables to find cause and effect relationships. The independent variable in an experiment is a condition that is manipulated or changed by the scientist. The effects of manipulating an independent variable are measured by changes in the dependent variables. Dependent variables are observed and measured during an experiment. They are the experimental data. Changes in dependent variables depend on the manipulation of the independent variable. Suppose a scientist is testing medications to treat high blood pressure. The independent variable is the dose of medication. The dependent variable is blood pressure, as is shown on the screen here. Ideally, only one independent variable should be tested in an experiment. Thus, all of the other conditions have to stay the same. The conditions that do not change during an experiment are called constants. To study the effects of an independent variable, a scientist uses a control group or control condition. Subjects in a control group are treated exactly like the experimental subjects, except for the independent variable being studied. The independent variable is manipulated in experimental groups or experimental conditions. Constants in the blood pressure medication experiment include how often the medication is given and how the medication is taken. To control the experiment, these factors must remain the same or be held constant. For example, the medication could be tested with 0, 25, 50, or 100 milligram doses twice a day taken by swallowing a pill. By changing only one variable at a time, the amount of the medication, a scientist can be more confident that the results are due to that variable. Third main idea: a theory explains a wide range of observations. The meaning of a word may change depending on the context in which it is used. The word theory has different meanings. In everyday conversation, the word theory means a guess or a hunch. In science, the meaning of the word theory is very different. A theory is a proposed explanation for a wide range of observations and experimental results that is supported by a wide range of evidence. Recall that a hypothesis is a proposed answer to a scientific question. Hypotheses about natural and physical phenomena that have been tested over a wide variety of conditions are incorporated into theories. For example, natural selection is a scientific theory. It is supported by a large amount of data, and it explains how populations can evolve. Hypotheses propose answers to scientific questions. Scientific theories provide explanations of phenomena. In contrast to hypotheses and theories, a scientific law defines relationships that are valid everywhere in the universe. For example, the law of conservation of energy states that energy may change form, but it cannot be created or destroyed. A law describes without providing any explanations. Theories are not easily accepted in science, and by definition, they are never proved. Eventually, a theory may be broadly accepted by the scientific community. Scientific hypotheses and theories may be supported or refuted, and they are always subject to change. New theories that better explain observations and experimental results can replace older theories. Scientists must always be willing to revise theories and conclusions as new evidence about the living world is gathered. Science is an ongoing process. New experiments and observations refine and expand scientific knowledge. One example of how scientific understanding can change involves the cause of disease. Until the mid-1800s, illness was thought to be related to supernatural causes or to imbalance in the body's humors or fluids. Then, scientific research suggested that diseases were caused by microscopic organisms such as bacteria. This is the basis of the germ theory of disease, which is still accepted today. However, the germ theory has changed over time. For example, the germ theory has been expanded due to the discoveries of viruses and prions. Viruses and prions are not living organisms, but they do cause disease. The link between prions and disease was not even suggested until the early 1980s, when evidence pointed to prions and the cause of mad cow disease, and in humans, both classic and variant Czech-Jacob disease. Scientific inquiry is important to understanding nature, but there are limitations to the kinds of questions that scientific inquiry can answer. For example, observations must be testable and verifiable. Observations that cannot be verified or replicated cannot count as evidence in scientific inquiry. Some phenomena that are not scientifically testable now may become testable with new or better technology. Other phenomena, such as supernatural phenomena, may never be testable or scientific. Fourth main idea: scientists communicate information in many different ways. You may have seen written sources that include scientific information, such as product advertisements, magazine articles, or web pages. Scientific information may be presented at science fairs or symposia, which are forums for professional scientists to present and discuss new research, as is shown on the screen here. Because there are so many ways to communicate scientific information, it is important to know how to evaluate different methods of communication. Recall that new scientific research is reviewed by other scientists through the peer review process. During peer review, scientists consider many things. How was an experiment done? How were the data analyzed? Do the data support the conclusions? Is there bias in the experimental design or in the conclusions? Peer-reviewed scientific information is published in scientific journals. Scientific journals are primary sources of scientific information and include results and conclusions, along with experimental methods, data, and the details that other scientists would need to recreate the investigation. Almost all scientific knowledge presented to the public comes from secondary sources. Secondary sources summarize or report only portions of primary information. Magazine articles, news reports, textbooks, and advertisements are examples of secondary sources of information. Secondary sources may contain pieces of data that are most relevant to the source. Not all information that is presented as scientific is reliable, however. Reliable sources of scientific information are based on empirical evidence, logical reasoning, and testing. When evaluating scientific information, consider the evidence that supports the scientific claim, the purpose of the source, and whether any bias is present. Use critical thinking skills to evaluate the information. Chapter 1, Section 3, Scientific Thinking and Processes. Key concept. Science is a way of thinking, questioning, and gathering evidence. Main ideas. Like all science, biology is a process of inquiry. Biologists use experiments to test hypotheses. A theory explains a wide range of observations, and scientists communicate information in many different ways.